Nelson Chamisa, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're 40 years old. Not so long ago, you were the youngest Zimbabwean parliamentarian. Now you're about to challenge for the presidency of your country. You're clearly a man in a hurry, but your critics think you're in just a bit too much of a hurry. Do you understand that criticism?
Well, I'm a man on a mission, a man who is willing to change the face of politics, not just in Zimbabwe, but on the African continent. I'm a Democrat. I'm a revolutionary. I believe in the transformational promise, and this is why I'm willing to take up the challenge, no matter how big.
I talk about a man in a hurry because it was quite extraordinary what you did. Your former leader of the Movement for Democratic Change, Morgan Tsvangirai, died on February the 14th after a long struggle with cancer.
Indeed.
1 day later, you decided to seize the interim leadership of the party, much to the consternation of other party members.
Nature has a vacuum. After the death of our icon, a great revolutionary on the African continent, the face of change in Zimbabwe, we had to make sure that within the confines of constitutionalism, rule of law, the party constitution, we kick in to provide leadership because we have such.
But there is a thing, decency, respectfulness for a man who's just passed and for his family and for a feeling that the party as a whole needed a pause.
Indeed.
And yet you wouldn't pause.
There was a pause, and of course what we did was within the constitution to then do it much way after. In fact, it was 2 weeks after the demise of our president that we had to have the internal processes that then gave way to a democratic outcome in terms of who should then be leading the movement for democratic change.
Well, you make it all sound so simple. The Chronicle newspaper in Bulawayo, and Bulawayo, of course, is a stronghold of the opposition in Zimbabwe. The editorial in that paper said that we are appalled by Chamisa's lust for power and the disrespect he's shown to his leader by angling for his position just a day after his death.
Well, they must be appalled because they are rooting for the ruling party. They support the ruling party. They would want to see the opposition in disarray. They would want to see us in sixes and sevens. We have not given them a chance. What we want to have in Zimbabwe is to have Zimbabweans having a real chance to fight for democracy, to have an alternative, and to have the birth of a new order.
But there is disarray. That's the problem. There's disarray because at the time of his death, Morgan Tsvangirai had 3 different deputies, of whom you were one.
Yeah.
But one of the others, who was a long-standing vice president of the party, Toko Kupe, she was so infuriated by your grab for the reins of power that she refused to accept it, and now she's running as an alternative MDC leader with her own team, her own platform, and a determination to destroy you.
The build-up of democracy is that we must have the more the merrier. And the fact that she has decided to walk away is actually something that is regrettable, but something that has not shaken the base.
But you say we wanted to avoid disarray. You haven't avoided disarray, have you? In fact, you've made the chaos inside your party something of a standing joke.
Which is the most popular alliance. You know, you go across the whole country in Zimbabwe, the mood is just electric. The electricity, the momentum is unbelievable.
Well, we'll talk about that, your message and how it's being received in the country. But let's just for a moment longer stick with the politics of your party.
Indeed.
You say it was all constitutional. We did it by the book.
Indeed.
I doubt that there's any rule book in your party which suggests that young thugs should physically intimidate people inside your party that have a different view of who should be leader, but that's what's been happening.
Well, we have had challenges, and must say that the challenges are as a result of the DNA, the default setting in the politics of our country, where violence has been a major issue. We are trying to deal with
You're supposed to be different.
In fact, this is what I'm dealing with as a new leader, as a new face.
Well, if you're dealing with it, do tell me then what has happened to these young men who surrounded Toko Kupe at the funeral in the same village where the funeral was taking place of Morgan Tsvangirai. She was forced to take shelter in a hut, and as the local reporting suggests, there were young men who tried to set that hut alight. And as far as she was concerned, it was an attempt on her life. And these people responsible for that action were supporters of yours.
All those people who were identified because everything was under a video camera have been dealt with. We've said we are not going to have bad apples affecting the basket of good apples of Democrats. We will not accept any violent enemy. any violent element within our midst. This has been our position.
Forgive me, but the bad apples still seem to be in the basket. You say we've dealt with them. That happened. That incident happened in February.
Indeed.
On the 4th of March in Bulawayo, Ms. Coupe's supporters were again attacked at a meeting that she was speaking at.
This was a different meeting altogether, a different geographical setting altogether.
So the bad apples are still there.
And then there is an investigation that was then done to deal with those issues. And we've said, let's move forward by making sure that in our midst, we do not want people who thrive on violence. We have been victims of violence. For the past 18 years, we have been at the receiving end of state-sponsored violence. I, myself, am a victim of that violence, nearly left for dead several times at the airport, in the various circumstances, but I've said we cannot use violence to transact politics in a new dispensation.
I suppose the danger is that some of your supporters have picked up habits, perhaps even tips, from the way in which ZANU-PF and Mugabe's people ran Zimbabwe for so many years. In other words, there are bad habits that have been formed in Zimbabwe, and your party now seems to have taken some of them on board itself.
I can tell you that the movement for democratic change is a happy family of Democrats. All those elements that are bent on using violence to transact politics have been dealt with and shall be dealt with.
In what way? You say dealt with. I mean, that's a broad term. To be specific with me, what has happened? Have they been expelled from the party? Have they faced justice? Have they been in a court?
We check out all the culprits, and we also appeal to the police at any given point in time, as we did in Buhera, to help us deal with those culprits. In fact, our gravamen, our complaint was to do with the police themselves, who actually did not do anything about it, when in fact they were the ones who were escorting the colleagues that were affected.
Let's just talk a little bit about the legacy of Robert Mugabe before we get into the election, the policy platforms, and your rivalry with Mr. Mnangagwa for the presidency. Robert Mugabe is now in retirement.
Indeed.
There he is, living in a rather grand house with grace and not being bothered by anybody. Now, you described the treatment you received from his ZANU-PF and security officials during your political career. Do you want Robert Mugabe to face a court? Do you want him to face justice?
Well, I must say that Mr. Mugabe is part of our past, is part of our old order. And I have no time for us to be pursuing the past, to be pursuing the old order. Our critical challenge going forward is to make sure that we resolve fundamental, deep and structural issues that are affecting our society.
Well, of course, deep structural issues, including surely an accounting for terrible violence. The Gukarundi killings, for example, you know, where thousands and thousands of people were rounded up and many were killed. Wouldn't Zimbabwe be a healthier society if people were held to account for what happened?
Indeed, they have to account. Part of what I'm going to do under my new administration, starting from July after the election, is to institute a truth, forgiveness, reconciliation and compensation program across the whole country to look at our checkered past, to investigate it, to be truthful about it, and to be humble about it, so that we create a new chapter going forward based on peace, based on reconciliation, but also, more importantly, based on nation building. Part of the legacy of Mr. Mugabe.
But people in Zimbabwe will want to know what that means. For example, there are serious allegations floating around in the country about missing billions, revenues from the diamond industry that appear to have gone missing off the government's balance sheet. And frankly, given the way power worked in Zimbabwe for so many years, the buck would appear to have stopped at Robert Mugabe's door, and perhaps Grace Mugabe's too. People want to know, are you prepared to take Robert and Grace Mugabe into a courtroom?
If I'm to be given the chance to drive the vehicle called Zimbabwe into a new dispensation, I cannot be that driver who is driving looking in the rearview mirror. The past is important, but the past should not arrest us.
So we'll take that as a no.
Yes.
Mr. Mugabe and Grace Mugabe can rest easy.
Let us look at Mr. Mugabe's contributions, his omissions and commissions. Let's say where he has had omissions, we are ready to correct, to repair. And of course, we need to make sure that those who were affected are compensated so that there's proper national healing going forward.
Yes. I suppose nobody would dispute that what Zimbabwe needs right now is mature, responsible, wise leadership.
Indeed.
Would it not be true to say that in the months he's had power, Emerson Mnangagwa has exhibited all of those qualities. He did set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He has ensured that the process of establishing the rules and parameters of an election are already in place. Ballot papers have been printed. He has assured the international community it'll be free and fair, and invited the EU and the Commonwealth and others to send monitors. All of that you welcome, I imagine.
We don't. In fact, there's a fundamental dispute around the manner in which these elections are being manned in preparation. We're not in agreement in terms of who prints the ballot paper. We're not in agreement in terms of where the ballot paper is going to be, the security of the ballot paper, its distribution. We're not in agreement, and this is 3 months before an election. We're not in agreement in terms of the role that should be played by our important and esteemed security forces in terms of election. We're not agreed in terms of the opening
when
of
you say
spaces.
that, you do sound partisan, defensive, and maybe even alarmist. I'm looking at independent analysts like Eldred Manansunguri, director of the Mass Public Opinion Institute in Harare. He says this, he said in a direct quote, "This election looks likely to be the freest, fairest, and possibly the most peaceful since 2000.
Well, he's saying it looks like. It's his opinion. And this is the beauty of a democracy. When you have a diversity of opinions, that's his view. Our view is that this election has the potential to be a free and fair election. But we need to resolve some of the fundamental issues around how the election itself is going to be conducted, whether or not the voters' roll has been audited, whether or not there's processes that are supposed to be respected in terms of the electoral amendment of the Electoral Act are respected. Just yesterday we had Parliament. We did not agree, the opposition and the ruling party, on the content, character and substance of that Electoral Act.
The reason I talked about wisdom, responsibility, maturity is that clearly in Zimbabwe, political temperature can rise very quickly. We've seen it happen in the past. It just seems to me that you and one of your associates in the opposition, Tendai Biti, have been stoking the flames in recent days. Tendai Biti said, unless we get a clear commitment from the securocrats, by which I think he means the ZANU-PF military nexus, unless we get clear commitments from them that they won't interfere, the election, he says, will be a sham. And you have said that if you don't get your way on things like the ballot papers, you're going to bring the poll to a halt. So you're raising the temperature, aren't you?
We're lowering the temperatures. In fact, Mr. Mnangagwa is raising the temperatures by continuing to be the old order. He has refused to part with the past. He has refused to be the face of the new order. In fact, he has chosen to be the new face of the old order. And that is our fundamental issue. If we are to be able to move forward, let us agree on how the election is going to be held. Wisdom is not when you destroy a country. Wisdom is not when you have problems that we're currently having, cash shortages, failure to deal with the economic issues, economic mismanagement, corruption like the one we have seen in terms of the airways in Zimbabwe, where there's been massive corruption under the tutelage and tutorship of President Mnangagwa.
Well, Emerson Mnangagwa has a record, and his record is that as soon as he got into power, he talked about truth and reconciliation and passed measures to ensure...
And where's the chip?
Well, hang on, I haven't finished his record. He also passed an Indigenization and Economic Empowerment Act, which foreign investors seem to like, that foreign governments seem to like. He's also pledged to fight what you've just described as the scourge of corruption. He said, and I'm quoting him, "We have now committed to the effort to defeat corruption that's plagued our nation. We're going to require cabinet ministers to declare their assets and create anti-corruption courts." But the man is actually delivering on a transformation.
In fact, we are the change that delivers. Mr. Mnangagwa is the change that doesn't deliver. In fact, Mr. Mnangagwa represents change without a change. He represents the face of the old.
Why do you think governments like the UK government are reaching out to Mnangagwa and suggesting that they think he's proving to be a good leader in Zimbabwe?
They are reaching out to the people of Zimbabwe. Let me say this. You cannot have change without change agents. You cannot have transformation without transformers. Mr. Mnangagwa is not a transformer. There can never be any reform without reformers. What he is a transactional leader who has transacted a particular process in November, and he is there not as the face of transition, not as the face of transformation. We represent that change that is yet to come.
Well, you keep telling me you represent change, and that's, I guess, an attractive slogan for many people in your country. But there's a difference between making promises you can keep and making promises that are nothing more than fantasy. Let's go through a few of yours. In January, you told the people of your country that you could solve Zimbabwe's liquidity crisis in 2 weeks. And indeed, if you failed to do so, you would leave office because you said you are committed. 2 weeks to solve the liquidity crisis. I mean, that's nonsense, isn't it?
It's not nonsense. It's very sensible. In fact, that is the most credible message that has ever been received by Zimbabweans. Why am I saying so? The most fundamental issue in Zimbabwe is not a crisis of cash, but a crisis of leadership, a crisis and a deficit of confidence and trust. The issues that we are going to deal with are productivity, issues of skills transfer, issues of investor confidence.
But with respect, Mr. Chamisa, politicians who say they can fix a problem that's been dogging a country for years, fix it in 2 weeks, that just sounds silly.
During the inclusive government, with all due respect, Mr. Saka, during the inclusive government, when I was Minister of ICT, Mr. BT, who is my colleague, was the Minister of Finance, we fixed this problem within a matter of 4 days. There was cash across the board in all the banks. So it's not just a question of hyperbole, it's not just a question of political promises. We know our competence, we have a track record, we can be trusted, we can deliver, and we will deliver.
Well, it reminds me of the promise you made to party supporters in Chinhoyi, saying you're going to build a bullet train from Bulawayo to Harare. You said that under your tutelage, this infrastructure will allow people to travel from the one city to the other in 35 minutes. I mean, that is beyond nonsense. That's just complete Alice in Wonderland.
That is the future. I'm a visionary. I'm a young man. And I've said we must begin to build infrastructure, such as the infrastructure you have in the UK. What it does entail is that...
you know, I'm no transport expert, but it's more than 400 kilometres from Bulawayo to Harare.
Indeed.
What this train of yours, it's going to be travelling at 800 kilometres an hour. Which, by the way, the fastest maglev train in the whole world can't top much more than 400 kilometres an hour. So I don't know where you're finding your trains from.
What I must emphasize that I was emphasizing the point of modern transportation, bullet trains being elsewhere on the African continent. You are aware of Morocco, recently unveiled a bullet train that was launched. You are aware of Ethiopia, where they've had tube trains. This is the kind of promise that I'm giving. And I know that it's a credible promise.
But Zimbabweans surely want politicians who are serious, who tell them things, make promises that can be delivered. I mean, patently, that promise cannot be delivered. In fact, the one promise that seems to me you could deliver on if you wanted to, but maybe it wouldn't be wise, is just a few days ago you made a speech saying that you were going to chuck out all of the Chinese investors and workers currently in Zimbabwe. You said, I'll call the Chinese and tell them that the deals they've signed are unacceptable and they should return to their country. Do you think that would be good for Zimbabwe?
And I must say that our transformational promise is premised on infrastructure. As I indicated, infrastructure is going to be key.
But the Chinese have delivered airports, they've delivered roads, they've delivered clean water and sanitation infrastructure, and you want to throw them out.
I have not said I would throw anyone out. I've said that all the deals that have been signed have to be reviewed, have to be assessed and audited in the context of what is good for Zimbabwe, what is best for Zimbabwe, what is safe for investment. And that position has nothing to do with any nationality. We are busy to do business with all serious investors across the whole world, the Chinese included.
But it is about credibility, isn't it? And as I list all of these different policies of yours, do you actually think that you're striking the right balance between populism and credibility?
I think the credibility is very high. In fact, Zimbabweans are going to vote for us. They believe in our message. They know that what we are promising is not something that is beyond our reach. We have promised in the inclusive government. We delivered. When I was Minister of Information and Communication Technology, during the inclusive government, I dealt with issues of Wi-Fi, I dealt with issues of connectivity, bringing in the fiber optic cables into the country. So I'm not the sort of guy who would just give empty promises. I'm a serious guy. I'm in business. I'm in the digital age. And these things I'm saying are going to be delivered, are available. We have BOT and BOOs in terms of triple Ps. Public-private partnership agreements that we are ready to put in place to make sure that we deliver on transportation, on energy, on water, and of course on communication.
You say you're a serious and credible guy, and of course that's being measured not just inside Zimbabwe but around the world. You went at the end of last year to Washington DC, and a lot of serious questions were raised about your behaviour in Washington DC. You did see some senior people on Capitol Hill, some Congress people, but you also claimed that you'd seen Donald Trump. You claimed you had a conversation with him in which you said he asked you how much you needed to move the country forward. You told him $15 billion, and he said to you that he would provide the money if you won the election. That was not true, was it?
Very true that, yes, in terms of our reconstruction program, according to the African Development Bank...
No, but what I mean is, it was not true that you'd seen Donald Trump and that Donald Trump indicated to you that he would provide, if you won the election, $15 billion.
All those statements were said by other people, not what I said.
Well, no, because there is a video which shows you at a rally in January back home in Zimbabwe saying that Donald Trump had pretty much promised you $15 billion.
I said we met the Trump administration.
So to be clear, because some people in Zimbabwe are still confused, you're now telling me you did not meet Donald Trump.
We did not.
No.
We met the Trump administration. And that's the point I made.
Well, but the White House was so irritated by what you did say that they came out, issued a statement saying, we never support individuals or political parties.
Which is correct. It is never a support on the political party.
Well, I know it's correct, because that's precisely what they said.
And I agree with that position. It is the support to a government of the day. When we form the next government, there are things that we've said we would want to see in place.
Did you tell the Americans that you would like to see sanctions stay in place until after the election, i.e. that you would like to see the sanctions remain as long as Emerson Mnangagwa was in power?
Certainly not.
So you want the sanctions lifted as soon as possible?
We have said sanctions are not good for the country, but it takes two to tango. We must also have our obligation in terms of observing human rights, good governance within our own country, respecting our own citizens, so that we are able to be also admitted as respectable players in the family of nations.
Emerson Mnangagwa has all of the instruments of power at his disposal. He has the backing, of course, of the ruling ZANU-PF party and the machine that goes with that. He is going to win this election, isn't he? I mean, you're putting up a strong fight, but he's going to win.
I don't know where you're getting this. He's going to lose this election.
I'm getting, I suppose, a feel from talking to people in Zimbabwe, reading the press, that ZANU-PF, because Mugabe and Grace Mugabe are now off the scene, still commands the loyalty of the people of Zimbabwe.
So, but Mr. Mugabe is not Mnangagwa. Mr. Mnangagwa is coming in with a completely fractured party. He has his own part of the party, but clearly he will not win this election. I will defeat President Mnangagwa in this election. Let us go to the election. This is a very crucial election, just like the 1980 independence election. It's actually the old versus the new. It's an election between the bad versus the good. And I can tell you that next time you invite me here, yes, you'll be my guest leading the people of Zimbabwe.
Well, we'll see what happens next. But Nelson Chamisa, for now, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.